Welcome, everybody. This week we're talking about The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is, for one, has a lot of S's in it and also has a bunch of other stuff going on. And Brent's going to tell you all about it.
Shevek is a brilliant physicist working on a new theory that may be as transformative and foundational as the work of Einstein. In pursuing his theory, he discovers that his dry homeworld of Anarres is not as free as he believes it to be. His society of anarchists has grown rigid, bureaucratic, and resistant to change. In order to pursue his work, he must leave Anarres and be the first to travel back to the deeply unequal home planet of Urras. Will Shevek succeed at completing his theory and igniting the fires of change? Or will he be consumed in the struggle for freedom?
Hello, everybody. I'm Cody.
And I'm Brent.
And we are the Hugonauts, here to review and discuss with you the best sci-fi novels of all time. This week, Dispossessed, which is a great classic. It's one of those books that it makes sense why it's on the all times list. And it is 387 pages, or a new metric that I realize comes up in my page count Google every time. It is 10.7 ounces. So for those of you readers who kind of judge length of time input, how much you'll have to read based on the weight of the book, 10.7 for you.
Yeah, especially you Europeans. Yeah, you'll be happy to know that it's 10.7 ounces. Yeah, extremely useful number.
They have to also convert. And it's about 13 and a half hours on audiobook. It was published in 1974, and it won the Triple Crown, Hugo, Locus, and Nebula. It's a good book.
Yeah.
Brent, what do we got next?
Next week, we're going to talk about all the books that were nominated for this year's Hugo Awards. So this is books that were written in 2022 and then nominated for the Hugo Awards that are coming up soon. It was kind of a weird year. The awards are happening in China. And anyway, we're going to talk about it. Some good books nominated. There's some other good books written in 2022 also that we're also going to tell you about. But anyway, all that next week.
Yep. And also thanks to those of you who joined us on the Discord for the book club. This was our first chance at it. We actually voted out of 6 books on which book we talk about this episode, which the Dispossessed won. And then we gave everybody on the Discord some time to read it. And then we had a little discussion, which people joined in for, which was really fun to think about. And it was fun to get to chat to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we seem extra smart this episode, it's because we're stealing your ideas. Thanks, guys.
we had some help. But Brent, why don't we get into it? What's your star? What's your review?
I'm going to give this one 4 stars. Le Guin is just an extremely talented writer, and it's a really interesting cerebral book that's like a fusion of sci-fi, a character-driven story, and honestly, like a economics exploration of, hypothetical human societies. Really interesting book. Yeah.
It's basically what I have to say, and the same score, 4 out of 5. I think Shevek, the protagonist, is an excellent character to kind of take us on a tour of these hypothetical worlds that Le Guin has built and made felt realistic to compare our social and economic systems to. Plus, there's some other interesting stuff in it. It's a wide-ranging, dynamic novel. Really like it.
Yep. It also has a somewhat non-traditional format that we should talk about. So
yep.
It's told in every other chapter switches, jumps back and forth in time. So we start with him leaving to go to the planet Urras, and then all the rest of that timeline is him on the home planet. And then the next chapter is when he's a very small boy growing up on Anarres. And so that timeline goes through his life growing up and as a, not just growing up, but as an adult as well on Anarres. It's a little bit dislocating at first, which is why we're warning you about it. But it is, there's some good reasons she did it that maybe we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, it brought up an interesting discussion in the book club about this type of format in general, right? The parallel timelines that are told chapter by chapter, or something like that. fairly common in literature, and it seems
Literature.
I know.
Cody went to college for literature.
Whoa.
Everyone, now you know.
Yeah, the second that came out of my mouth. Anyhow, you could see how that is a challenge for some people to read, depending on how you read, right? Like if you're the type of person who reads a little of a book and then reads some of another one and then watches a movie and then it's 10 days later and you're reading a little bit more of that book, I can see why jumping back and forth in timelines can be challenging. For me personally, I really love that trope and that strategy. I think it can bring a lot of like mystery and anticipation to pretty like mundane plots. And you can get some cool twists out of it. But I also see why some people it's like, nah, not for me.
Yeah, I think it makes sense in this book because, to your point about sort of the more mundane plot, it's not really like exciting page turning style until the end. And so I think having that alternation and sort of some questions about what's happening does help keep you engaged, given that. Yeah,
I agree. I think it keeps it fresh, and it also, it mirrors some of the core narrative themes and ideas about time and how humans experience time. It like brings it all together.
Yeah, Shevek's physics theory is very tightly related to the narrative style.
Yeah, so I think it really works here.
For sure.
But just wanted to talk about it in general too. Yeah, and so should we chat about Shevek then? Because that's really the main, character.
We keep referencing him. He's like the heart and soul of this novel. Really good character. Le Guin's writing is like really spare, but like hits really hard in general. She doesn't use like a lot of words to make her points. And then Shevek is like that, like on steroids. He's the kind of guy who like, there's a meeting going on and he doesn't say anything until the end. And then he says like 3 sentences and everybody's like, okay, fine. We'll do it your way, Shevek. Anyway, he's great.
Yeah, it's an awesome character, and brings a lot of emotion to the text. There's a bunch of other great characters too, but we'll just contextualize them as they come up because there's a ton of them, and really Shevek's the foil to see like how these social and economic systems affect people, affect him, and then his broader retinue. The one thing I will say is Ursula K. Le Guin, when I've recommended her to people who don't read sci-fi in the past, maybe it's like a sci-fi fantasy muscle we all have, but she really goes hard on the names. On Anarres, in fact, they're named after a set of syllables no one else alive is on Anarres.
Yeah, they're all 2-syllable names that have to be unique. So they're all
Shevek, Badap, Tyrin,
Takver.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're not real, quote unquote, real names.
Yeah. So it could be a little bit of a second to like remember who's who with Le Guin, but it's worth it and kind of fun to read weird names like that too.
For sure. I will throw out there, it is a little, I guess like a little confusing, but at least they all do look quite different. Easier than ancillary justice, though. Oh my God. Anne Lucky pulled out all the stops with that. 2 syllables, nice. No 17-syllable names here, ladies and gentlemen.
And Miatnai.
Yeah. It's so much. When I'm reading ancillary justice, I just like, my brain just like skips over the words. Like, okay, I know who you're talking about. I don't even bother.
Like fills in the character.
My brain doesn't even make sound. It's just like, skip it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway.
So yeah, and in the Dispossessed, we have a little bit of science and tech overview. They have interstellar travel, and they're kind of forward. They're just like a futuristic civilization, Anarres and Urras.
Yeah, they're part of it's part of her Hainish cycle. So there's interstellar travel and there's human societies living on multiple planets. So this is together, Urras and Anarres are the Setians, and there's also Terrans who live on Earth, and there's the Hainish who are sort of the oldest and the coolest to sort of like learn about. You just get to like learn about them around the edges of the novels. But anyway, yeah, that's like the meta framing. But honestly, inside each society, it's kind of like not that different from our own societies. They just have interstellar travel and then like, trains and cars and stuff.
It gives you the freedom to think about our society because it's in a hypothetical setting. She doesn't need to nail like the realism of our different countries' governments and stuff to bring her point home.
Yeah, for sure. Which is very much her point in this book. This is a book that's like all about the themes and the big ideas. Like right at the beginning, the first chapter, she starts off with this description of how walls work two ways. They keep things out and they keep things in. So you can't just build a wall and not have it impact you also. Just super powerful, obvious idea, and she's just got so many good ideas like that all through here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it reflects Shevek's journey, trying to be the one leaving Anarres.
The wall breaker.
Yeah. The wall breaker. And that's really, as you may have guessed, the main point of the book, is comparing kind of the communist, socialist, anarchistic society of Anarres with, I guess, not really communist, so it's like socialist, anarchist.
They call themselves anarchists. I don't know what to even call the economy, really. They kind of don't have an economy anyway.
Right. And that's Anarres. And then Urras, specifically the country of AIO or AIO, however you pronounce that, is, and I listened to the audiobook. That's where Shevek goes, and it's kind of a, standard modern capitalist economy. And so she's comparing.
It's so rough. I would not want to live in AEO. But that's kind of fun to explore.
That's a good point. It's not standard. It's not standard. It's a pretty hardcore version of capitalism. But she uses the two, Shevek in the two settings to compare the societies and the economies, and like the downsides and advantages of either, which I think is the most palpable and important thing about this novel is that I feel like when you have that dichotomy in a lot of novels, you get the author is almost always trying to like make an argument for one, and maybe like for kind of purposefully putting aside some of the inconveniences of, what's good about the bad one and what's bad about the good one. And Le Guin is so fair about both of these societies and the issues that would arise in either of them and the values of each of them, which is what makes Dispossessed such an incredible novel. Like what are some of those? Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. So when Shevek's growing up, he sort of believes that he lives in this like perfectly equal, perfectly free society where, no one can tell you what to do and you can do whatever you want. And then as he gets older, he sort of starts to realize like, oh, I can't actually do whatever science I want because there are people who are in charge of the scientific institutions and they kind of get to tell me what to do. And I have a friend who like wants to write a play, but they're not going to let him put it on because they think it's subversive. And it's just, he sort of starts to realize like, oh, it's actually like, you may not be able to buy things, but like there are people in charge actually. And it's sort of an interesting realization for him as he comes to sort of recognize like some of the ideas their society was founded on maybe aren't true anymore.
Yeah. And that it's difficult to innovate, right? And push things forward. The people who are entrenched and want to keep the status quo can, because it's morally, it's the moral high ground in that society. And also they have the power. So there's these powers in different social structures, even though ostensibly they are fully free to make whatever choice they want. There's tons of social pressure and social obstacles for them being able to exercise that freedom.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then on the flip side, you've got, this. He's just visiting one country. It's like the whole planet of Urras that's this way. But anyway, what we're sort of led to believe is the most powerful country on Urras is AIO, and they are, they have like a gross inequality, incredibly bad. It's very classist as well, but like, he sort of blanches at one point when he's in a store and sees there's a fur coat for sale that costs, like 4 times the average person's annual salary. And he's like, well, that's disgusting. Why does that exist? It's like, well, fair point, Shevek.
Yeah. And he sees it as he's brought to a university to do his physics theory thinking. He's trying to basically break how they do interstellar travel and think of a new overarching theory that will help develop new technologies for interstellar travel. And so the university is paying for him to be there, and they're trying to hide the underbelly of AIO from him. And eventually he figures it out. He's like, there's got to be a labor class supporting this. What are they like? That's more kind of my people. And he finds them, and it leads to a really exciting finale to that branch of the story. But along the way, you also you have the advantages of both societies. So to go in reverse, like Urras, he also notices, okay, I mean, they're really getting things done. Like using money as the carrot to drive industry is really, they're able to really innovate. They are, what's the word?
I don't know, less ossified. They like make change. They make new things. They're like, it's a much more,
they're more incentivized. Equal, they're more incentivized to innovate and innovate quickly in that type of system. Whereas on Anarres, they're almost incentivized not to innovate. But the advantage of Anarres obviously being stuff like
everyone has enough to eat every night. Like everyone on the planet. That's not a question. If you show up anywhere, they will feed you. Like that's not ever, it's like not even possible that would be a question or a worry for anyone,
Yeah. Everyone gets 2 meals a day, no matter if you're working or not. You just show up at the cafeteria basically and you get your meals.
Yep. And they also have like really strong social cohesion. But then he starts to notice some similarly to the same thing happens in both places. So on Anarres, he is told he has to learn Iotic, the language they speak on Urras, so that he can correspond with scientists there. But he gets told, don't teach anyone else Iotic. We don't want them like hearing their ideas. They don't want they don't want other anarchists hearing these ideas because that'll be disruptive. And then he gets to Urras, and they're trying to like keep him in this fancy university so he won't go out and talk to any normal people because they don't want the normal people like thinking, oh, they should have a better life. And so, basically people in charge of both sides are trying to keep anyone else from hearing about any other systems. They just don't even want it to be a question about what do we want society to be like. They just want it to be assumed like, well, obviously our way is the best way. I mean, that feels like so many of these points, right? Like, well, that feels like something we sure do in our societies.
Yeah. And to the metaphor about the wall working both ways.
Yeah, with all this, there was an interesting discussion we had in the book club about which society you would rather live in. That's something that's definitely more fun to like chat about than us like tell you our thoughts. But if you want to, drop us a thought and drop us a comment on the video or come join us on the Discord and let us know where do you want to live. Because it was definitely it's a fun thought experiment. They're both like hyper extreme versions of this like their particular society, and you see all the downsides, so it's not a super obvious choice. At least it wasn't for most people. Yeah,
no, we had a big mix of people, and also a lot of caveats. People being like, well, Anarres, but
Urras, but please God, let me be in the upper class.
and Anarres, but the shared housing where you have people from down the hall being like, when are you leaving this apartment? I want to squat here next constantly. That also seems annoying.
Yep. All this stuff kind of makes a lot of sense for Le Guin's life. Her parents were respectively an anthropologist and a writer. And so, this sort of, a lot of her novels feature this like sort of like clash of cultures ideas. And then this one also has a bunch of like frustrated, scientist frustrated with academia overtones. So anyway, it all fits.
You can tell where it came from, much like Left Hand of Darkness, which feels like it's written, by an anthropologist, which makes that novel quite interesting as well. So The Dispossessed, we liked it overall.
Yep.
And we have some similar books to recommend. Brent, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we've already talked about it, but just to make it clear, Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. That's also in this Hainish sort of cycle. So it's set in the same universe as this book. Extremely compelling. That's sort of the book that like blew Ursula like up onto the world stage. That was the first time a woman had won the Hugo Award. It's a tremendous book. Dispossessed is really good too, but I think Left Hand is like even a little better. So if you want to try out some more Ursula, that's definitely a place to go.
Definitely. We have an episode on that one too. We did a while ago. I love that book as well. And another one would be the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. Just kind of something we could think of that has a lot of, it's got the sci-fi elements, but is also a lot about society and economy building and seeing hypothetical new ways we could do things as a people and what it might look like, what these different systems might look like in a compelling environment.
Like a way different political and economic system than Earth, and you hear a lot about it.
Yeah, you do. Definitely not for the faint of time availability. The Mars trilogy.
They're so long. The first one is let me just throw the disclaimer out there. The first book is so good. Red Mars is amazing. And then in my opinion, they steadily get worse. So like, don't feel like you have to read them all. If you read the first one, you're like, that was good, but I didn't love it. You could stop. Anyway, okay.
It's true, but I also liked the second and third one. So I think,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you love them, keep going. But just, they keep getting longer.
Don't feel bad. And then finally, you've got City in the City on here.
Yeah, City in the City by China Miéville, which is weird book. But it's about these two cities with very different, again, economic and political systems, and they occupy the same physical space through a very unclear method. Is it magic? Is it science? There's these spooky agents of breach who like enforce it. And yeah, anyway, just a super fun, weird book and an exploration of these like two different societies laid literally on top of each other.
Yeah, City in the City is awesome. That's a good one for those of you with less time who just want a quick, fun read about weird societies. So with that said, let's talk about what happens in the rest of the Dispossessed. So thank you for those of you who were just here for pre-spoilers, and the spoilers begin in 3, 2, 1.
Okay. So here's what happens in the rest of the book. So on Anarres, Shevek meets, his partner. He has kids, and there's a terrible drought and a famine that lasts a couple of years, and sort of everyone in society gets pulled into just trying to get enough food to stay alive. He stops being a scientist and starts being I think he's a truck driver for a while. He's a farmer. Anyway, really bad drought. They get out of that, and sort of eventually he comes to realize this anarchistic society is not as free as he thought. And he joins up with this old friend of his, Badap, and some other people, and forms this group to sort of push back against the committees. And they build a radio to talk with Urras and to start to exchange ideas. And as part of that, they then invite him to come to Urras. They invite Shevek to go, which he agrees to do. And so then, of course, now we're back to the start of the novel in the other timeline. And so in that timeline, he gets to Urras. It's incredibly decadent. Eventually, he realizes they're keeping him from seeing normal people in society. They're just letting him see like rich people, and he's stuck at this university. Eventually, he escapes, so literally has to escape from them, meets some normal people. He gets swept up in this huge like strike. Maybe it's sort of moving toward a revolution. And then the government brutally puts it down. They're literally machine gunning like thousands of people. It's really crazy. He lives through that. He escapes and gets to the Terran embassy. So that's like the embassy from another human planet, and strikes a deal with them where he's going to release his physics theory, but to the Hainish. So the Hainish will share it with everyone in the universe. It's because the Urasti, it's become clear they want to use it. They would try to like keep the information private to themselves to try to make money off it. And he doesn't want that to happen. He wants everyone in humanity to have it. And he does, and then it becomes clear that the thing his physics will enable is instantaneous communication, which then it gets used in Left Hand of Darkness as the Ansible. So it's cool. This is sort of like, it's in that same universe, but it happens before. And like the most important technology and an idea of Left Hand of Darkness, Shevek invents it in this book.
Yeah, it's a cool little origin story for some of the Hainish cycle for stories that just kind of happens on the side. I felt that was a fun way to like insert something like that without it being the focus.
Yeah. I loved at the end when he's hanging out with that Hainish guy. I think he's a pilot, and he agrees to go to Anarres with him. And Shevek is like, oh, well, it's an anarchy. Like, you got to be ready for that. And the Hainish guy's just like, our society has been going for millions of years. We've tried every kind of society like 14 different times. I'm not worried about it. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it just made me so interested in this like Hainish society that was so ancient. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, it's totally the side point of this book, but it definitely made me curious.
Yeah. And another thing we were talking about earlier that's interesting is that the disjointed two timelines of this text really come back together at the end to bring home one of the points of the books, which is that humans, the way we experience time is both linear and cyclical, and that cyclical is perhaps, I would say, Le Guin is arguing, perhaps the better way to be. You can seek pleasure on a line, but it always has an end. If you go through the cycle of inevitable suffering and joy, you always get to, arrive back at the beginning and start over again and find that joy. And that the suffering is necessary for that joy along the way. And there is a power in returning home, and a deep, emotional connection to home.
Yeah, I had not thought about sort of how the cyclical nature of the book tied in with his physics until you pointed it out. And I really, I think you're just totally, absolutely right. That's definitely why she did it. It makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's interesting to see, it's basically like he went through this, the second time he went through his cycle was faster. On Urras, he had to go, the cycle that on Anarres took him, 30 years for him to realize like, oh, there's something wrong with my society. I need to change it. On Urras, the second time he goes through the cycle, he manages it in like a year or 2 years. So anyway, maybe there's no way to live without the cycle, but maybe we can come to the realizations a little bit faster as we get more experience.
Right. And also another thing, as we said earlier, it could be kind of slow to get started, but it really does pick up towards the end. And particularly, you were thinking about one scene.
Yeah,
where it gets crazy.
Yeah, the when he's like hiding in the underground and he's like putting out this crazy pamphlet and he's telling people basically about what it's like to live in anarchy. When he's on
Urras.
Yeah, it gets really exciting. And then he's giving this speech on like at the he's on these like government steps or whatever, and then the government just shows up and starts shooting everyone. It's like, oh my god, I had totally forgotten how brutal this was, and it just it actually does pick up that like page turning, pulse pounding style at the end, because it's like very unclear if he's going to live. They've killed all these other people. He's got he didn't want the Erasti to figure out his idea, so he's got like this physics theory in like arcane code in 14 different tiny pieces of paper over his body. It's like, is society going to like lose this idea? Is he going to be able to get it out there? Yeah. Anyway, it just gets really exciting and brutal.
And brings home the government control point in a visceral, violent way. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say about it is that I thought that there was a really interesting point that Le Guin makes that's going to stick with me for a long time, which is that fundamentally understanding time, understanding that there is a past, there is a present, there is a future, and understanding causality basically inherently makes humans moral beings, because we can understand that our actions have effect on other people and other things. And I thought that was just it kind of glossed over in the text, and I thought that was just such a powerful point.
Yeah, without the continuity and the way we conceive of time, yeah, we could never build anything, for sure. Yeah.
And we might not be considered, we might be off the hook morally, but we're not, because we can understand causality.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, this was so fun fun chatting on the podcast as always, but also this is really fun to talk about in the book club. One final thought, one of the last things that we had a really fun time talking about with everybody was whether a society like Anarres is like really possible, particularly what would happen to it if there started to be more resources. Part of how Anarres stays the way it is like everybody's just barely surviving. So they all sort of, there's not enough to go around. That sort of creates this communal atmosphere of trying to survive. And so the question is, if once there starts to become more resources, could Anarres happen? So anyway, let us know what you think. Really, really curious to hear your thoughts.
Love The Dispossessed. Love talking about it. And we'll see you next time for all of the Hugo winners, or the Hugo nominees, rather.
For sure. Keep reading, everybody. See you then.